Hi, I'm Cameron.
And I'm Hayden.
And this is
Until the End of Crime.
This episode contains graphic and gruesome description of torture and murder. Listeners, make sure you're taking care of yourselves. If this isn't the right episode for you, we will be back next week. Hayden, what is your favorite memory of Halloween?
I don't know if I have any favorite Halloween memories. I don't remember anything about like actually engaging in Halloween activities. I remember trick-or-treating, I guess, a couple of times back when, but I don't know. Halloween seems so distant to me, or at least my experience of it as a kid.
I mean, you're dressed in Halloween clothing
Yeah, that's
and
true.
attire today.
I do have one with skeletons, with one skeleton that has their entire spine and the other one doesn't. And the one that does have the spine is actually holding the spineless one's spine. And it says, "I got your back." And I do have a Halloween cup today that has all of the villains on it, like Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Scream, or what do they call him? Something about his face, and Jason. I do like Halloween. I remember as a kid, I enjoyed watching like Halloween movies, not the Halloween franchise movies, but Halloween Town.
Yeah.
And Halloween Town 2 and Don't Look Under the Bed and shit like that.
Nightmare Before Christmas?
No.
Oh.
I hate that movie.
Why?
I hate anything that's like stop animation, claymation, Tim Burton. There's nothing Tim Burton that I like.
Okay.
I hate Coraline. I think that's Tim Burton.
Yeah, it is.
Beetlejuice is fine.
Definitely having a moment right now.
Beetle Hugo is okay, but I don't like it.
Okay, fair enough.
But I do like Halloween. I have been on Hulu's Huluween section for the last month, but I've been watching a lot of animated TV show episodes of Halloween. A lot of Bob's Burgers Halloween episodes. They're all very good if you need a good laugh. A lot of Family Guy. So I guess, what did you ask me? What's my favorite Halloween memory?
Yeah, what's your favorite memory from Halloween?
Okay,
because today is Halloween. Happy Halloween, listeners.
We know it's Halloween. It's been established.
Look, this episode is dark, so I want to know what your favorite memory of Halloween is so that we can at least have a high point.
Okay. My favorite Halloween memory that comes to mind is one year, gosh, this was probably 2016. I got to take Kyla trick-or-treating, and I took her to a trunk-or-treat first at a local church. And my sister had dressed her up as a beat-up zombie bride.
Why do I feel like I remember seeing the pictures of this?
Because it looked so scary. My sister did such a good job with the costume and the makeup, and Kyla loved it. But if memory serves me correctly, my Aunt Audrey was like, this is too real. This is too gross. And so we went around the church parking lot doing the trunk or treats with
terrifying
this
people.
Terrifying, smiling, bloodied zombie bride. It was very cute.
So your sister missed her calling.
Honestly, maybe.
To do cinematic makeup artist.
I think she could have done that.
Yeah.
She does a great job now, but I think she could have done that. Yeah. I'm sure my niece doesn't think so at this point.
She's exactly in the right age to not think that her mom is necessarily good at anything.
She gets so mad because her little high school friends will refer to Miranda as a MILF.
Oh, that is weird.
And it makes her so upset. And my sister's like, that's disgusting. Why would you even say it to me? Like, don't even tell me. I don't want to know what your little friends say.
Yeah.
This is not even Halloween related.
So back in like 2010, 2011, I was living in a rental house with two roommates, and it had this little empty flower bed that was next to the walkway, and the staircase had a window in it.
The staircase had a window?
Yeah, the staircase was split halfway. There was a landing that went up. The only thing that was at the landing was the window overlooking that little flower bed thing. Anyway, and I spent the, October or September decorating for Halloween that year. And I had this motion activated ghost that would fly across the yard when you walked by. And I had put hands coming up from the grave, and I put a tombstone in that little flower bed, and I put strobe lights in the window, and there were spider webs everywhere, and I definitely went.
Well, you really went all out.
I sure did, to the point that for Halloween, kids were scared to come to the door. So that's what it reminds me of when you're saying that Kyla was dressed as a scary zombie bride, is the time that I maybe went too far when I was decorating, and kids, because parents will want their kids to go to the door by themselves, but there were several parents who came to the door. They were like, yeah, she wouldn't come up here by herself.
It's really weird that as a society, we send children up to the door by themselves.
Yeah.
Also, not for nothing, I read an article last year about the kind of, what would be the right term? The kind of, I've already used the word, but phenomenon of parents now take their children to select neighborhoods instead of trick-or-treating in their own neighborhoods. And it's almost created this like communal black hole where neighbors don't get the opportunity to interact with each other and each other's children because they don't trick or treat in their own neighborhood anymore.
Yeah.
And I think it kind of further belabors this movement away from community to a more generalized and broadened globalization of everything we do. I think some things, but being localized, that's how we develop a network of support and community. So you can trust that if you send your kid to the door on their own, that nothing terrible will happen to them. And so I think the further we stray from that, the more likely we are to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's an opportunity to get to know your neighbors, even if it's just seeing their faces and exchanging a few words and establishing a baseline connection. Just a, hi, I'm a human, you're a human, we live near each other, we could have each other's backs.
Yes.
If anything happened.
Exactly. I would love to know that I had neighbors that cared about children and their community in a way that made them excited to decorate like you did. I think that's healthy for an entire community, not just the people with children.
Yeah, because I know that in the neighborhood that I grew up in for the first 10 or so years of my life, that in particular, the people who really appreciated the kids coming and trick-or-treating at their houses were the older people in the neighborhood who maybe had grandkids that didn't live in the area, or who didn't have grandkids, or whose families weren't able to come see them. They were always the ones that were so excited when we would go to their houses. Some of them didn't even buy candy because they didn't expect people to come. So I remember going to one lady's house and we went inside and we had ice cream.
Honestly, that's a score.
Yes, but it tasted very like it had been in the fridge for a while.
Well,
so it wasn't my fridge.
the elderly don't believe in expiration dates.
That's true. Hi, Mom. She knows
But she's elderly?
that she doesn't believe in expiration dates. I guess that makes her elderly if that's the criteria.
I guess every square is a rectangle, but not every rectangle is a square.
Correct.
Sorry, Candy.
Speaking of candy, this case doesn't have anything to do with any of it.
Oh, good. Good.
On November 25th, 1988, 18-year-old Hiroshi Miyano and 15 or 16-year-old Shinji Minato were driving around Misato, a town in the Saitama Prefecture in Japan. They were patrolling Misato with nefarious intentions. They were on a mission to steal from and sexually assault local women.
Oh, God.
It was during this time that the two males spotted 17-year-old Junko Furuta, who was biking home from her part-time job around 8:30 p.m.
What did a female teenager do for part-time work in Japan in 1988?
I will get to it.
Okay. Does it play a role?
No.
Oh. What are the villainous patrollers? What are their names again?
Hiroshi Miyano and
Miyano.
Shinji Minato.
Okay. Hiroshi and Shinji.
I refer to them by their surnames throughout.
Okay. What are their last names?
Miyano and Minato.
Miyano and Minato. That won't confuse me even a little
At
bit.
all. And they're in Misato. I know. I was like,
Miyano, Masato,
Minato.
Minato. But Minato is a person.
Correct.
Just make sure you keep me in check.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, thank you.
The older male, Miyano, told Minato to cause an accident with Junko that would knock her off her bike and then to flee the scene with it. After the incident, Miyano approached Junko to offer help after posing as a mere witness to what had occurred. He offered to walk her home to ensure she made it there safely, a pretense that worked. escort.
They are incredibly duplicitous.
Yeah. Miyano earned Junko's trust and was able to convince her to go into a warehouse with him, where he abruptly dropped the pretense of being...
I thought he just walked her home.
That's what he offered to do. They were walking, and he convinced her to go into a warehouse with him.
Okay.
And that's where he abruptly dropped the pretense of being a kind stranger and threatened to kill her. I do get into this later, but it is not for certain that they were strangers. It seems like they may have gone to school together.
Okay, so they may have already had some history.
They may have. I do talk a little bit about that towards the end of this, I believe, but it's not 100% clear to me. Miyano proceeded to sexually assault Junko in the warehouse. Miyano had told Junko that he was a member of the Yakuza, which can most closely be linked to the Western idea of a gangster or maybe like the mafia. And Miyano, Minato, as well as two 17-year-old young men, Joe Ogura and Yasushi Watanabe, were all Chinpira, which is essentially a low-ranking member of or someone who has ties to and maybe hopes of joining the Yakuza.
I think the Yakuza are a serious deal. Like, they are big and bad.
That's why I likened it to the mafia, because I saw something that compared the two. Like, Yakuza is akin to the mafia, and then Chinpira is akin to just like a street gang member. Maybe. Obviously, there's a cultural thing at play that I could be missing context for. So, but that was the best way that I could find to...
It sounds like this could have been almost like some kind of hazing activity for them.
Possibly. It doesn't ever say that, but it's, I guess, possible.
Or some kind of gang test or gang initiation.
Maybe. It seems like they were already...
Did it seem like any of them did this against their will?
No.
Okay.
So all four of these young men had dropped out of school in the summer of 1988, and it seems they took up being Chinpira as a full-time job. After assaulting Junko inside the warehouse, Miyano took her by taxi to a hotel where he sexually assaulted her again.
Could the taxi driver not tell that something was wrong?
There was nothing about that. It just said that he took her by taxi. It does say a few times that he was threatening her life, threatening the life of her family. So
I don't know culturally necessarily how women in Japan are treated, but I do know it was just recently exposed that Japanese medical schools and all of them were rigging the admissions process to where like a first-time male test taker got like 16 extra points just for being men towards their admissions score, where females started out at a deficit. And it was discovered that it was every single Japanese medical school. And that was just this year.
Recently. So we're talking almost 40 years before this.
Yeah.
Can't imagine it was better.
No, that seems like a stretch.
After assaulting Junko, Miyano used the phone in the hotel to call Minato, who was with Ogura and Watanabe, to boast about having sexually assaulted her. And during this call, Ogura urged Miyano to keep Junko captive so that he, Minato, and Watanabe could also sexually assault her.
Oh my God. They had already assaulted her as a group.
Well, they hadn't yet, only Miyano.
Okay.
But they wanted Miyano to keep her captive so that the rest of them could, because the four of them had a history of gang rape and had kidnapped and gang raped a girl previously.
Okay.
And the girl in question never told anyone about this incident because she knew of their ties to the Yakuza and was afraid of what they might do to her or to her family if she ever spoke about it.
Understandable.
In the wee hours of November 26th, like around 3 a.m., Miyano left the hotel with Junko and took her to a nearby park. Minato, Ogura, and Watanabe were all waiting there for the pair to arrive. Once they were all there, the guys told Junko that they knew where her family lived and that if she attempted to flee, they would be paying her family a violent visit. Fearing for her life and the life of her family, she did not attempt to escape. She was also overpowered by four males who had already begun to brutalize her sexually and psychologically, so there's also that.
It doesn't sound like there was a viable escape option.
No. The youngest member of this group, Minato, agreed that Junko would be able to stay in confinement on the second floor of his home, which was a typical hangout spot for the group.
So they had plans on keeping her indefinitely.
Well, at least for a period of time, yeah. They had plans of keeping her confined. And in staying at their home, this would allow the group unfettered access to her for the purpose of repeatedly sexually assaulting her. Junko Furuta worked part-time at a plastic molding factory in order to save money for a graduation trip. She would be turning 18 in January on the 18th, the age where most Japanese students finish their secondary education and move on to higher education, very similar to the education system in the United States. She had already accepted a job she was to begin after graduation that would involve selling electronics. A responsible middle child of 3 and her parents' only daughter, known for being friendly, as we can probably see at play through her willingness to accept help from Miyano.
Yeah.
At Yashiyamanami High School, Junko was a popular and serious student who worked hard, made good grades, and rarely ever missed school. She had actually attended the same high school as the 4 young men before they quit school, and in one source I found, it said that one of the 4 boys had asked Junko for a date, but it said there were different reportings on which of them it actually was.
Okay.
It did mention that it was probably one of the 2 who originally saw her riding home, Miyano or Minato.
That does seem to make the most sense. At this point in time, where you're talking about how Junko has been moved to the 2nd floor of Minato's home, at that point, how many rounds of sexual assault had she already endured?
At least the 2 by Miyano,
Okay.
one in the warehouse and one in the hotel.
And then 1 gang instance already.
Well, they were taking her there. It is my understanding they were taking her to Minato's house to gang rape her.
Okay.
But I don't know that they did that in the park.
Okay.
Hiroshi Miyano is cited as being the ringleader of the group, which tracks since he is the oldest of them, as well as the one who took the lead on isolating and kidnapping Junko to begin with. His troublesome ways began when he was quite young, getting himself into trouble for theft and vandalism before ultimately joining a gang that would lead him to commit sex crimes. At the time of Junko's kidnapping, Miyano was living with his girlfriend, who was Watanabe's older sister, but she ended the relationship with Miyano after discovering his involvement in sex crimes. On November 27th, at least 36 hours after Junko did not return home from her part-time job, her parents contacted the police to report her missing. In order to disrupt any investigation that they were trying to conduct, Miyano, the ringleader, forced Junko to call her parents on 3 separate occasions to let them know she was fine, that she had just run away, and not to worry because she was staying with friends.
But her parents could tell something was wrong.
Yeah, it was out of character for her.
Right.
She was not going to school. She was not coming home. All of that was out of character for her.
So
she wasn't going to work.
What did the police do?
We're going to get into what the police did.
Or didn't do?
We'll get into it. November 28th.
I'm going to stop you because I already know they fucked up.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, of course they did. Cool. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Okay. November 28th, 2 other young men were invited to Minato's house. Tetsuo Nakamura and Koichi Ihara joined the group for whatever the cough medicine version of Puff Puff Pass is,
Okay.
acting like they were doing hard drugs and ratcheting up their behavior. They were in the room Junko occupied, and she became fearful, starting to scream and attempting to escape, which caused Minato's mother to become alarmed. But when she came to check on the teens and commotion, she was assured by the group that they were just messing around, everything was fine. She didn't need to be concerned about the screaming, they were just teenagers being goofy.
So these punk ass bitches were living in his parents' house and sexually assaulting this young woman in their home?
Yeah.
While they were getting fucking high off of perp drink, off of some cough syrup?
Right.
Okay. Wow, they're so badass.
Yeah. So
Obviously said with sarcasm.
yeah. So Minato's mother left the room, at which point, while Junko lay motionless staring at the ceiling, the 6 boys gang raped her.
Oh my God. This poor girl is going to suffer too long. I already know.
She already has.
Yeah.
If you're curious at all about the fact that Minato is the youngest member of this group, but his house is the one where Junko was taken, I'm here to tell you that it is exactly as unbelievable as you would think. Whenever his parents were home, Junko was forced to live and act as if she were his girlfriend. Well, they only forced her to uphold this ruse until the group all realized that Minato's parents weren't going to contact the police.
So they became complicit.
They feared their son, who had already been violent with them, and his friends friend's connections to the Yakuza, which is why they didn't call.
So failure there.
This next paragraph is hard. As I mentioned previously, Junko was kept at Minato's home to serve as a ready-made victim for repeated sexual assault for the group and apparently their friends. The most people to gang rape her in a single day was supposedly 12. It is believed that she was raped by around 100 men, approximately 400 times in total.
I know this is not a visual medium, so I want to explain that it's hard for me to even produce speech in response to hearing that because it is so unfathomable. It is so evil. It transcends my ability to conjure language that would explain what I feel and think.
Right.
Because it's more than evil. It's more than sinister. It's more than duplicitous. It's more than disgusting and awful, horrific,
Vile.
It's truly horror. That is a horror movie come to life.
Right.
And I think that I lack the verbal knowledge and expertise to describe it any further than sheer horror, because it is an
I don't know how else you would.
right, because any sexual assault is unimaginable. It's awful, it's terrible, it's irredeemable. But here's this young woman who has been sexually assaulted, for lack of a better term, gang raped by 100 different men more than 400 times.
Right.
The police, no doubt, have let her down, even though you haven't gotten there yet. The parents of Minato, I understand fear. They have a reason. They have a very real reason to be scared if the Yakuza is involved. I don't know how you continue to allow some young woman you do not know to be so mercilessly tortured in your home. How do you live with yourself?
Well, and I don't know how long she was there while they believed that she was a girlfriend of their son's. I don't know how long
they ever believed that.
I don't know. It was a ruse that they upheld until they realized that the parents wouldn't call the police. So obviously, yes, at some point. But there were reports of her being missing and they still didn't contact the police. So
yeah, because those fuckers that were so scared of their son and his Yakuza ties, they knew from the beginning. They knew that wasn't a girlfriend. Sorry, not to slander them, but in my opinion, what I think is they intuitively knew immediately. They knew the first time they heard her scream. So I hope they're not dead, because if they are, they're in hell.
the parents?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people in this scenario,
Right.
but you don't get a pass because you're scared of your child.
Right. So as if all of that wasn't enough, she was also beat regularly and subjected to other forms of torture.
Other forms?
In addition to what has to be constant sexual assaults, the young men would beat her so badly that she could hardly walk and then force her to sleep out on the balcony in the frigid weather with hardly any clothing on, or sometimes they made her sleep in the freezer. I don't know.
What kind of freezer?
I don't know, because if that were true, she would likely suffocate, run out of oxygen in there. So I'm not sure. They removed her pubic hair, which made it easier for them to then burn her genitalia.
They would burn her genitals?
They made her dance and masturbate for them while they played music. And after she attempted to escape in early December, the gang took turns punching her in the face. Miyano also burned her ankles using a lighter as a result of this attempt to escape. The gang would use various objects, including a bottle, a metal rod, and a lit match to vaginally penetrate and sodomize Junko.
Beyond words, still. I mean,
Yeah,
more so.
It's not going to change.
Also, what did they use to burn her genitals?
A lighter and probably cigarette.
They just took an open flame to it?
Yeah.
Okay. This poor girl had to be terrified from start to finish. Was there ever any reprieve?
Probably not. I mean, we're going to get into right now. Junko was malnourished during this time. She was being fed very little. She was force-fed almost exclusively, it seems, at some point, large amounts of water, booze, and milk. And eventually she was only given milk for sustenance. She was forced to smoke multiple cigarettes simultaneously, inhale the fumes from paint thinner, and basically kept in a state of discombobulation and intoxication. She sometimes became so sick and hurt that she couldn't keep water down. And there was an instance where Miyano allegedly stepped in a puddle of her urine, for which she was then punished by the group of 4 beating her before Miyano used lighter fluid to set her thighs and hands on fire.
fucking sick.
I know. I told you. This case is awful.
I'm glad we talked about our favorite Happy Halloween memories earlier.
I told you. With such terrible injuries and so little nourishment, her body began to fail her. Junko became incapable of using the stairs to go down to the bathroom. She lost control of her bowels and bladder. And there came a point where she was being beaten by the gang that she would beg for them to kill her. Because she could not control her bodily functions or navigate the stairs on her own, the group relegated her to the floor of the room she was kept in. She had been beaten so severely and so frequently that her nasal cavity had filled with blood and her brain had shrunk from the malnourishment and physical trauma to her body. She was unrecognizable, and her wounds, having been left untreated with a body that was ill-equipped to fight off infection, began to fester and smell. At this point, because her wounds were emitting such a foul smell, the group lost interest in her, so they went out and found a 19-year-old woman to gang rape.
So they found another person.
Yeah, fortunately, she was not kept captive, but Junko still was.
So was their plan just to let her die in the house? She was clearly... I mean, if her body could not fight off infection, she's now malodorous because she's literally dying. That's what's happening. What, just going to keep her captive until she dies?
I have to assume at this point that you're wondering how long Junko was detained, beaten, raped, and tortured. Junko Furuta was held in captivity for 40 days.
Oh, God. 40 days of this. What dates did it run from?
November 25th to January 3rd, 1989. Miyano had lost money in a game of mahjong, or he lost a game of mahjong to Junko. Multiple sources stated each scenario, and at this point, I'm not sure that one is more likely than the other. But either way, losing this game made him angry.
How could she have even had the ability to play him in mahjong?
That's why I don't think that I think that he probably lost money, but it was in the evening of January 2nd, 1989.
Because if she's as bad off as she says, how does she have the ability to sit up and play mahjong?
I really think that some people give her that credit because it makes them feel better about, like, they feel like she was such a strong person because even in this state she was still able to beat him. But I don't think that she was in any position.
She was a barely living corpse at this point in time.
Right. Either way, he lost the game and became angry and decided to take his anger out on Junko. Oh, I misspoke. It was the evening of January 3rd because he decided to take his anger out on her the morning of January 4th.
Okay.
Miyano, again using lighter fluid, set her on fire. She attempted to put the fire out, but eventually lost consciousness. He lit a candle and began dripping the hot wax onto Junko's face.
After he'd already lit her on fire and she had passed out?
Let me get through this paragraph.
Okay.
The group also placed 2 small lit candles on each of her eyelids, and Junko was forced to drink her own urine. She was lifted into what I can only imagine was a standing position, so she was in a better position to be kicked, which caused her to fall onto a stereo set, at which point her body began convulsing. Because of the pus and blood coming from her infected wounds, the gang wrapped their hands in plastic bags to keep them clean and proceeded to beat her. They took an iron weighted ball and dropped it repeatedly on her stomach. All of this information was given in various chronologies, but each incident of torture was included in every source. So it is unclear if the group started with lighting her on fire or ended with that, but I'm not sure it really matters.
Right.
This attack lasted 2 hours, and Junko succumbed to her injuries around 10 a.m. on January 4th, 1989, 2 weeks before she would have turned 18.
I was really hoping that Junko made it out of this.
It seems that the group didn't realize yet that Junko was deceased. So they were out hanging out, I assume at someone else's house because this was the 80s, and Minato's brother called him to tell him he was pretty sure that Junko was dead, which caused the gang to grow concerned about being charged with her murder. So they headed back to Minato's house.
Absolute fuck. How could you have not realized up until this point that this was what was going to happen? What did they think the other ending would be?
I don't know. I mean, you're asking me to infiltrate the minds of these people, and it's something that's outside of my capabilities.
Yeah, it's okay. Okay, I'm sorry, continue.
So they headed back to Minato's house, wrapped her body in a blanket, and shoved Junko's body into a large travel bag. Miyano also placed a videotape in the bag with Junko's body. The videotape was of the final episode of a show she had mentioned wishing she had watched during her captivity called Tonbo, which means dragonfly.
Why?
He claims he did not do this for Junko, instead stating that he did it to help ensure that her spirit would not come back and torment him.
Well, good luck, bitch.
They placed the bag with her body in a 55-gallon metal drum and then filled it with wet cement. At 8 p.m. on the 5th, the group drove out to a vacant lot near a construction site on the island of Wakasu in Koto, Tokyo, where they dumped the cement-filled drum containing Junko's body.
Why would you dump it at a construction site?
I
You
think-
filled that bitch with concrete. Go out into the ocean.
I don't know.
Okay. Dumb. Dumb, dumb, dumb.
Yeah, let's keep them dumb. I would
Yeah.
rather them be dumb than get away with this.
Absolutely. How could these people... You kept someone hostage, captive for 40 days. You violently sexually assault, gang rape, torture, sodomize, burn, beat, more things that I can't enumerate right now. And you've gone through this entire process. You're too fucking stupid to know that she's dying or to understand that she is now dead. And this brother of his, why has he not done anything helpful? Just like those worthless fucking parents. And now they've put her remains with a tape of her favorite show because which one doesn't want to be tortured by her spirit?
Miyano.
Okay, fucking dumb. Okay, continue.
So 19 days after dumping her body on the 5th.
Not just dumb, evil, malicious, horrific, all of those things too. I just have such a hard time understanding how they could be so evil and sinister.
Cavalier.
And then not have the thought to maybe we should take other precautionary steps.
Well, I mean, it wasn't a particularly sophisticated crime, so I don't know why you're expecting a sophisticated disposal of the evidence of that crime.
Yeah. I guess it feels like a group that was able to pull off such a crime, even though it was not sophisticated in nature, would at least have the ability to hide their crime a little better.
But they're affiliated with gang activity.
Yeah. Okay.
A big part of the reason that this was able to even go on for as long as it did is because of their ties to the Yakuza, because of their Chinpira activity.
Yeah, you're right.
So 19 days after disposing of Junko's body near this construction site, Miyano and Ogura were arrested for the sexual assault of a 19-year-old woman that occurred in December 1988, which I think is probably the same woman who they went out and found because Junko's wounds were producing an odor that made them no longer interested in assaulting her.
Yeah.
A little over 2 months after their arrest, 2 officers came to talk to Miyano about the fact that women's underwear was discovered at his residence as well as Ogura's. It is possible they lived together, since the last I knew, Miyano's girlfriend had kicked him out around the time of Junko's murder, which was about when she discovered his participation in sex crimes. Miyano believed that Ogura had given them up for the murder of Junko, so he told the officers where they could find her body. The policemen were confused because they had not been talking about Junko. The policemen were confused because they had not been talking about Junko. They were actually inquiring about any involvement in a woman and her 7-year-old son's murders, which took place just days prior to Junko's abduction in what is to this day an unsolved case.
So he gave himself away.
Yeah, he thought that Ogura had given them up, so Miyano essentially confessed. Obviously, though, the officers followed up on this confession and recovered Junko's body. They were able to identify her using her fingerprints. In addition to Miyano and Ogura, Watanabe, Minato's brother, Nakamura, and Ihara, potentially along with others, but those were the only names that I found listed, were all arrested for the rape of Junko Furuta after their DNA had been found on and inside of her body. Being that they were all under the age of 20, therefore considered juveniles, the 4 young men's identities were all concealed by the courts. But the media disagreed, arguing that they did not deserve anonymity because of the severity of the crimes they committed.
And the media was correct.
Journalists uncovered the names and published them.
Good for the journalist.
All 4 of them pleaded guilty to, quote, committing bodily injury that resulted in death, unquote, according to one source. And according to another, they were all found guilty in July of 1990 of, quote, abduction for the purpose of sexual assault, confinement, rape, assault, murder, and abandonment of a corpse, unquote.
I like that one better. I like that.
It feels more thorough and accurate.
Yes, that first charge was fucking nothing.
Yeah. Miyano was sentenced to 17 years.
Not enough.
It seems that Ogura and Minato were sentenced to 5 to 6 years.
Definitely not enough.
And Watanabe was sentenced to 3 to 4 years.
Cameron, what? Mm-hmm. Is that it?
No. A year after their sentencing, all 4 appealed and were resentenced by the Tokyo High Court. It seems that they did not agree with the Tokyo District Court's original sentencing, and each was given a longer sentence.
So they appealed and got a longer sentence.
Yeah.
That's what I like. That's the thing I like to hear and see.
Miyano's went from 17 to 20 years.
Oh.
Ogura's went from 5 to 6 to 5 to 10. Minato's went from 5 to 6 to 5 to 9. And Watanabe's went from 3 to 4 to 5 to 7. I do just want to note before you say anything that a 20-year sentence is the longest sentence that can be given in Japan that isn't a life sentence.
And what, they don't get the life sentence because they're not 20?
Probably. Also,
what is going on in Japan?
Well, one source mentioned that Miyano was the only one of the 4 sentenced to prison. The other 3 were sentenced to juvenile detention.
I'm sick of this story. They brutalized everything under the sun. I can't even rehash everything they did. And they went to fucking juvenile detention. Mm-hmm. The harshest penalty was what, 20 years?
Mm-hmm. In prison.
Oh.
For the 18-year-old.
Do they have the death penalty in Japan?
It does not seem so.
Because they did for Hiroshi Meiwa.
That's true. I don't know.
Okay.
I know Hiroshi Meiwa.
We can charge fucking kids in the United States as adults at the age of 14, depending on what state you're in. Mm-hmm. Like that, of course, obviously, the 14-year-old recently who...
Mm-hmm. America. This is America.
And he will be tried like an adult at the age of 14. And we're letting these 17, and which I'm not saying I think he should or shouldn't be. But what I am saying is we're talking about these men who are 17 and 18 years old and they got juvenile detention.
Their intention when they went out on November 25th was to find women to steal from and to sexually assault. Like there is no point in this where this was not crime of opportunity. This was what they were going out to do. I don't know that they were going out to do it for 40 days to one person. I think that does lend credence to the idea that somebody asked her out and she turned them down.
Did no one try to stop this at any point? Did none of these men have any misgivings or humanity?
I'm going to get to some instances of humanity. They're not going to be satisfactory. They're not going to be, they're just going to continue to make you mad. But
yeah, she was tortured and she died. But surely I can't. Okay, go ahead. Continue.
Okay. After a failed appeal in July 1992, Watanabe was released in 1996 and went to live with his mother in an area away from his hometown. Minato's parents and brother, despite living in the home and having knowledge of this crime throughout the duration of the month and a half that Junko was raped, beaten, starved, drugged, and tortured, they were not charged.
Okay. Why the fuck not?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
Minato was released.
Does this girl get any kind of justice? Does Junko get any kind of justice? Because this is absurd.
It's a gross lack of justice. I mean, Minato was released in 1998 and moved in with his mother. 20 years later, in 2018, after a dispute over a parking spot, Minato was arrested for attempted murder. He had struck a man with a metal baton and slashed his neck with a knife. After his arrest, he denied hitting the man with the baton, but owned up to stabbing him, and he was sentenced to 18 months, but the sentence was suspended for 3 years probation.
After killing somebody?
After attempted murder. That man did survive.
Okay. Is he the one that got 20 years initially?
No, he was the youngest of the group, so
Okay.
he got the second lightest sentence. Ogura was released in 1999, changed his last name to Kamisaku, and worked in IT. Once his former name and identity was discovered by the people around him, he returned to organized crime. In 2004, he was arrested for assaulting a man with whom he believed his girlfriend was cheating with. He put him in the trunk of his car, drove him to the bar his mother either worked for or owned, and proceeded to beat him for 4 hours, letting him know that he was capable of murder, having already killed someone before, and essentially getting away with doing so. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison and was released again in 2009. Miyano was also released in 2009, but he was the one who was sentenced to 20 years, so that was... He changed his surname to Yokoyama and bragged about his ties to the Yakuza and involvement in pyramid schemes, which, let me tell you, MLMs were not on my bingo card for this week, but here we are. In 2013, he was arrested on the suspicion of bank fraud and scam phone calls, but he refused to speak, and they were not able to make any of the charges stick. The only information I have on Watanabe's family is that his sister had the wherewithal to leave Miyano after learning he was a rapist. And I mentioned already that Minato's family was not charged despite technically being accomplices. Miyano's parents sold their home and paid Junko's parents 50 million yen, which would have been 350,000 US dollars at the time, and which is equivalent to 800,000 US dollars in today's money.
And they paid them for what reason? Were they court ordered?
I don't think so. I think it was just paying them for suffering, literally paying for the crimes that their son committed against their daughter.
But this is not the same couple that could have been charged.
No, this is our ringleader's parents.
Okay.
Ogura's mother, on the other hand, blamed Junko for ruining her son's life, allegedly vandalized Junko's grave, and after repeatedly being desecrated, her grave was moved from its original location, and multiple sources mention that it was moved near Houston, Texas, so as to prevent further vandalism to it. I also read that her body was cremated, so I'm not 100% sure, but I did read in several places that she was moved to Texas to prevent further destruction of her grave. The absolute most gut-wrenching part about this whole case is that her murder could have been prevented with proper police intervention because they were alerted about her captivity and torture on 2 separate occasions and failed to act in a manner that served Junko. The first time, a boy who had been invited over, as so many had, was horrified about what was happening at Minato's house. And so he told his parents, and they phoned the police. The police apparently went to the house and were assured by the family that there was no young woman at the home. The police found this to be a satisfactory answer and left without searching the home or truly acting on this tip. The second time was when Junko herself was able to get a phone and call them. She called but was discovered before she could even utter a plea for help. She was punished for this. And when the police called the house back, Miyano told them the call was just a mistake. There was no one there who was in trouble.
So the police did fail her.
Yes.
Just like almost everybody else, except for the one boy or the one young man and his 2 parents that said, oh, this is fucking crazy and awful. Over 100.
Those were the words that I was about to say. Over 100 people knew and failed her, allowed it to happen, participated in it.
You know, it makes me think back to not a case that we've covered, but the case that has been going on in the media from Paris, where I can't recall her name right now, but she came forward and chose to have her case tried publicly because I guess you get a choice in France if you want it to be tried privately or publicly. And her husband, I guess for the last decade or over a decade,
I do know about this,
drugged her, posted listings for people to come and rape her. And all of these doctors and lawyers and professionals came and raped this unconscious woman, and you know, hundreds of them. And now there's reason to believe, and of course I haven't followed up on this closely, but that the daughter had the same experience at the hands of the father.
And that his wife and potentially daughter were not the only women in his life who he did this to.
Yeah. Well, and then you think about all of these allegations against Diddy, Sean Combs, and these, I don't know if you've heard anything about it, but he would have emergency medicine on site to administer IVs when these women and potentially men that they would also sexually assault and sodomize and rape, to give them IV fluids when they were dehydrated. Over 1,000 bottles of lube at one residence, which people have really sensationalized that part versus, oh, these people were tortured. It's so crazy to me to have this exposure of how rotten and awful humanity can be. That someone could keep something like this a secret, that they would say nothing. 100 young men did unspeakable things. And one wasn't okay with it.
1 in 100.
The parents of Montano.
Minato.
Oh God, I'm so sorry, Japanese community. It's not necessarily the name and how it's said, but rather there's so many. And he, again, words fail me. This is also going to sound so American. So sorry, international listeners. In America, those fuckers would have been fried.
Oh, yeah.
That would have been no doubt in my mind that if it were a death penalty state, they'd be on death row.
Yeah.
They would have got it 100%. And if not, that prison for life for sure.
For sure. Not out, attempted murder, assaulting other people, torturing anybody else for any period of time, 4 hours.
These people are not people that recover.
No.
There is no rehabilitating them. It is too much of a danger to society. And again, we've talked about it before, not a fan of the death penalty. But in this instance, the crime is so egregious that I'm sorry.
We'd make an exception.
You've earned it.
Yeah.
You tortured this young woman. You stole her life from her. You stole her dignity. You stole her virtue. You stole everything she had. You stole her from the world, from her parents, from her family, from people that loved her. 20 years in prison as the highest is fucking crazy.
Yeah.
The fact that the parents who housed them during this torture got nothing. I would love to know if any of these police officers were reprimanded. It's in Japanese culture, in their society, you have to have the camera shutter sound on. Did you know this? Phones have to have the shutter sound enabled on every phone device, whether the phone is silent or not. There is no way you can turn off the shutter sound because
you can't take a picture without somebody knowing that you're photographing them.
Because it was such an issue. But you have to reconcile all of these parts of what we know about Japanese culture and society with the fact that they also have an incredibly healthy population because they incentivize a healthy weight to an extreme extent and disincentivize anything else. I wonder if whatever the laws they have around this and sentencing quote unquote juveniles has changed at all. If there would have been a different outcome had this happen in 2020 instead of 1988, 89. And I'm sure if it has, I still wouldn't be happy with the outcome because there is no positive. There's nothing that makes up for it.
Nothing.
You have given me something to think about that is such an irredeemable miscarriage of justice. Anything would have been too good for them aside from experiencing their own torture.
Right. I agree.
Okay, continue.
I want to talk a little bit more about Junko and who she was. She worked hard for her grades. She worked hard to save up money. She had goals and dreams and ambitions, like working to pay for her graduation trip and wanting to become an idol known for her singing. She had a beautiful full face that she framed with bangs. Her cheeks had a natural contour that many people today would use makeup to carve out on themselves. Her funeral was held on April 2nd, 1989, and one of her friends delivered a eulogy that seems to have been written collaboratively by her classmates. They said that they never expected to meet her again like this after having suffered such cruelty while they carried on with their lives, not knowing the nightmare she was enduring day in and day out for 40 days. They noted happy times they had at school, citing specific moments they vowed to never forget. They also promised to not allow Junko's death to be in vain, promising to work to prevent crimes like this from happening to people as they were transitioning into adulthood and would be in a better position to work towards that. They speak directly to her, mentioning that the principal brought her diploma to her funeral and acknowledging that she and her entire cohort of 47 were able to graduate. And they end by letting her know that her pain and suffering is now done. The electronics retailer that had hired her to begin work upon her graduation brought with them the uniform that she would have worn when she began work there and presented it to her parents. The uniform was put into her casket with her to symbolize her accomplishment. And the principal, as it was mentioned, brought the diploma she would have earned to the funeral, but at their class's graduation, the principal presented it to her parents, so the complete class of 1989 was able to graduate together. That is the story of what is known in Japan as the concrete encased high school girl murder case. Junko Furuta was abducted, assaulted in every sense of the word, and tortured for 40 days until her captors finally had pushed her body to its absolute limit.
Have you ever seen John Wick?
I've seen parts of it.
All of those fuckers deserve to be John Wicked. For those of you that don't have the context.
I have some context. I know that he seek like vengeance on people.
Yeah, he's a former assassin and he goes on this rampage because these what seemingly were low-level criminals killed his dog, which was all that he had left from his dead wife. Mm-hmm. And then he goes on a mission to kill every single person involved. And it ends up going all the way to the top because they're a crime family. And all of that being said, in my opinion, everything they got was too good. Mm-hmm. And everything has indicated that there was no kind of actual rehabilitation.
No.
It doesn't sound like anyone learned a genuine lesson.
Right.
I want to know what happened to the other 96 fuckers that took part in this. I want to know if those awful parents are dead. Were they at least run out of town?
I don't know. I mean, her grave was repeatedly desecrated, which tells me that, but I don't think it was just by Ogura's mother. It tells me that the repeated vandalism of her grave means that there were probably some people who felt like these guys were wronged in some way. I don't know. It could have just been repeatedly Ogura's mom, but I don't know. I went back and forth over whether or not to cover this because it is so awful, but it felt important to share Junko's story because I did not know anything about this. And I can't imagine not knowing about the capability of humanity to be so depraved.
Yeah. I'm glad you shared this story simply for the fact that I knew nothing of Junko Furuta or what she had gone through or who she was as a person. It has given me a weird sense of American pride just because our justice system is whack. Mm-hmm. But I don't think a miscarriage of justice of this magnitude would have been allowed.
Maybe.
I feel almost certain.
It's not a perfect system, though. I mean,
no. And of course, I mean, that tells you about American values versus other international values that I'm sitting here wishing for some kind of harsher, more severe punishment.
I mean, O.J. Simpson was allowed to die a free man, so
right.
There's that.
Well, and it's one thing if you go to trial and you're found not guilty, right? That's a jury of your peers. The fact that they committed this crime, they owned up to it, and still the sentencing was so incredibly light. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Tough case. You did really excellent work, though.
Thanks. It messed with me. It messed with me for several days, this case. The research and just I was really jumpy in the days immediately after researching it. It hung with me.
I can only imagine. I know it's going to hang with me for some time.
Gave me a crick in the neck. A complete list of sources and any links can be found in the show notes. Are we not done?
I just feel like you should say something about if you experience secondhand trauma or vicarious trauma from listening to this episode, sources are available to you. Because it is heavy. It's heavy.
I know,
you just said it affected you. And I know it's affected me.
Mm-hmm. Well, as always, the mental health hotline is 988. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, do not hesitate to give them a call, 988.
Yeah, and if you see your friends doing something terrible, or you know they've done something terrible, or your family has done something terrible, say something. Oh my God. Maybe you could stop the next instance where someone is treated like Junko Furuta, because there were opportunities for this to have not been the case, and they were not seized. Mm-hmm. That's all we've got. That's all we've got for this episode.
A complete list of sources and any links can be found in the show notes. If you enjoyed listening, definitely call your therapist. because that is hard to imagine, but
yeah. If you want to hear more, please subscribe. Happy Halloween. Give us a 5-star rating and leave a review.
Recommend us to a friend and make sure you're following us at End of Crime Pod on Instagram.
Do you remember how our whole thing is a true crime comedy podcast?
We maybe missed the mark today.
It certainly was heavy on the true crime. Mm-hmm. Like us on Facebook at Until the End of Crime and join our discussion group.
Our email address is endofcrimepod@gmail.com, so send us an email with questions or episode suggestions.
Thank you for listening.
Until the next crime.